Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks. And happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thank you. Very kind. And today we're joined by Jeremy Smith. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
So we often you'll see it's just me and Kevin, but this week we've been really delighted that Jeremy said he'll join us. In fact, I used to work with Jeremy a few years ago. So yeah, and we've kept in touch all those years. And the topic today, well, a number of topics, but what we've got here is we've basically got a buyer and a seller. And I'll let Jeremy introduce himself in a second, but the topic will be around kind of predominantly as an agency seller. What does it feel like when you meet people like procurement? And as a procurement buyer, what are you looking for when you meet agencies like Kevin? So Jeremy, your background, briefly.
So I'll apologize in advance. I'm a lifetime consultant, but I'm also a lifetime procurement consultant, just to compound you. So yeah, I've been at 4C for 10 years, doing exactly what you said, procurement on behalf of organizations, helping advise them the best way strategically or even operationally. Before that, I was doing procurement consultancy as well. So yeah, lots of experience of buying, lots of experience of procurement, and lots of experience of different categories, of which marketing is one of them. So looking forward to the conversation, Kevin.
Very good. Likewise.
So what I'm going to do is this time is I'll act as the kind of interviewer and I'll pose questions between the two of you and we'll get some discussion going. First question. So I guess really to kind of, to both of you, is there an inherent tension between buying procurement and selling the vendor? And is there such a thing as a win-win negotiation? Everyone tells me they're a win-win negotiator. So Jeremy, let's have your view first.
I would say there is an inherent tension. There shouldn't be, but there probably is. I think the answer to avoid that tension, because absolutely people shouldn't be seeing each other as the enemy, that's not how it should be, is to align outcomes. If you align outcomes and everybody's open, fair, transparent, and clear and able to communicate, there should be no tension at all, because it's all about, and I'm going to bring in everyone's favorite topic of COVID. It has shown us that we all need each other, that supply chains are complex and that we need to work together, because if anybody is struggling or not performing or unable to perform in that supply chain, the whole thing falls over. So yeah. I think it's shown to people that why have we acted like we have? Why have we built into us, into our relationships, this tension that you refer to? Because it shouldn't be there. So even in the buying and selling phase, there is, because I could look at Kevin and go, "Ooh, he's going to sell me something. He's going to try and rip me off." Why start with that? You shouldn't.
Yeah.
But people do, and there are people out there doing procurement whose default assumption is suspicion, and it shouldn't be. Now, what I will caveat is marketing as a category, and you'll know this, Mike, is much less adversarial compared to some others. It's not as
like IT. Yeah,
exactly. IT much more arm's length. Big monopolistic suppliers who are just there to make as much money as they can. Marketing isn't. And I would say it benefits from that because it is less adversarial. But at the same time, it suffers a little bit because it's hard to be prescriptive. It's hard to really say what you want. It's hard to do it. And what I will, maybe we'll come on to this later. Procurement has a bad reputation for being all about cost. Now, I'm not going to deny that it is often about cost, but it isn't always about cost. But the reason it is often about cost is because it's easy to measure. The CFO can measure it. With marketing, it's harder. And this is where the sort of conflict comes that absolutely we should try and manage out of this relationship is marketing is driving top line growth. Procurement is seen and tagged, not wrongly, as being controlling bottom line cost. And therefore that tension exists.
Yes.
But the answer is you can have both. And it's about allowing the supplier to deliver as much as they possibly can, to deliver incremental growth, deliver that ROI at a fair price. And in that case, everyone wins. But historically, in answer to your question, there is a tension and there shouldn't be.
So, Kevin, what's your kind of experience of, rather than just kind of your opinion, you've been through many procurement cycles. I've been with you on quite a few of them. What's your kind of experience?
I think it's similar to when you did a training session for another agency, and I was involved in that as well, the end conclusion of that training session was, "Oh wow, procurement are people too." And I think there's definitely
Sometimes, Kevin, not always. Sometimes.
yeah. So exactly. But I think on the agency side, in our dream world, procurement are not involved, and you speak to the marketer and you get stuff signed off, and then you work together. And I think that's generally what you look for. And I think even as we've grown as an agency, we've worked with a lot of big brands, and I'd say maybe 50-50 on when procurement is involved, despite the size of the client. Sometimes they have their budget, they need to spend it, and they know what value is because they run a pitch process of typically minimum of 3 companies that they would look at. In my experience, when procurement's been involved, there's a good and a bad way of running it. And I think my observation and thinking ahead of this podcast of the ones that have gone badly, you do the pitch, you win the pitch, and then procurement come in and they beat you up on price. And even to the point I've seen this where I've now learned when on their side, maybe they're not as kind of got their act together as much as I would have thought, because we've had situations where we've been told we've won and then it's been passed to procurement. And having worked with Mike, it's like, that's a weird situation. You'd think you'd negotiate when you're down to maybe the final 2, but not kind of you've won and now let's negotiate. So I've learned on that side how much power we might have in the negotiation given what we've been told. But I think that's the example of when it doesn't work well. When it does work well, I think it's when procurement are involved at the start. So it's a process where, like Jeremy said, there's an outcome in mind. Procurement is educated and they want to understand what it is that the marketing team are buying, and they want to support the marketing team to make the right choice. But they also want to make sure that they get a fair value against what else is in the market. And in those situations, honestly, it's felt very professional, and it feels like procurement are more of an enabler to make the deal happen. But they're not there just at the end to say, actually, can you slash your prices in half? That's where it's just, it doesn't work. And it takes that feeling of, yes, we've won a pitch, into, oh God, what have we just won now? So yeah, I think that's the key thing for me is when they wheel out procurement at the end, it feels like it's not the deal that you expected.
Yeah.
What you described, Kevin, in the first scenario is absolutely bad procurement. It's the word, it shouldn't be done like that. And as I say, I started this conversation with a few jokes around procurement's perception, but it's true. And the reason why there is that perception is because of processes run like that. Because the business sees procurement as administrative, and we know who we want. We want to work with Kevin, and Kevin's the right person. Oh, right. Procurement has an opinion. Oh, I wish. Good luck. And they throw it over. So procurement feels the need to prove a point, and you're caught in the middle, which to the benefit of no one. So that's procurement done badly, what you described. But as you say, you get procurement involved early. Procurement are advising the business. The business is the one who knows what their outcomes will be. The business is the one who's going to be working and having a relationship with you. Procurement should be there to advise best practice of making sure that you are, one, enabled to do as much as you can, and two, doing it at a fair rate. And by fair, I mean, everyone knows people need to make money. As I mentioned COVID, what did that show? The people who had been squeezed went hot. Who paid the price? Not only them, but people above them.
Exactly.
So
yeah, there's a knock on, definitely.
It's all about, as you say, getting procurement involved early, because then they can advise and not meddle.
So Jeremy, I've got a slightly off-piste question, but it's on the same topic. So we've both been on this side, and I've been working with you before, is that, we'll write an RFP, and the RFP is comprehensive. It's got targets in it that the kind of like the budget holder's aiming for. It's got criteria about how we're going to score the responses. It's got some scope in it about what's going to be involved. And then what we say is, now there's a rate card analyzer attached. Could you just fill in the grades of people, the rate of each person, the hours they're going to spend on the project, as part of your response. So to help kind of our audience, which is agencies and entrepreneurs, how should an agency respond to that? Because to your point, we're trying to buy value, but we're asking you for a rate card, and the two often seem in real conflict. Just some ideas and thoughts. What would you do?
Well, Kevin mentioned earlier the word power. If you have, and he also mentioned the word relationship, you're talking with the marketeer and you're building that relationship. If you have a strong relationship with that marketeer, and that marketeer is more powerful than procurement in that organization, I honestly would say no to that rate card, because there's no value coming to the supplier. There's very little value coming to the marketeer. The reason they're doing it is because they want to have some ability to control it, and they want to have some ability to benchmark that there's some
compare
apples and apples and that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
It is going. We do it when we sell professional services. We try and avoid to do it. If someone asks for our rate card and how many days you're going to do, then our initial response is, aren't you applying us for an outcome?
Exactly.
You can't have both. You want an outcome, pin us to an outcome, let us worry about how we get there. Unfortunately, when procurement is disconnected from the process, in your first example, Kevin, refusing to give a rate card may end up badly for you. And that's why you've got to check. But ultimately, you should question back, why?
Yeah.
Why? If they're buying days and they're buying time and not buying an output, fine. It's all rate based. In which case, you do what you've got to do, and they can't complain with how long it takes.
Yeah.
If they're saying, I want to grow top line growth, well, they shouldn't care how they get there, so long as you're being measured appropriately. But it's easier said than done. In answer to your question, don't do it. But I know why you're asking.
And it's a fair response, Jeremy. I think, and I've been asked the same question by a number of agencies on webinars and one-on-one, and I've said very similar things. I mean, Kevin will attest to this. It's like, where we can, we have a conversation and we say, what you want to buy an outcome or an output, but you're asking us for activities on a pricing level. Doesn't make any sense.
No.
So we're not going to give you the rate card. What we might give you is we might tell you what the rate is by grade of person, but not how many days they're spending. And we're certainly not filling in your spreadsheet.
Exactly. And the reality is in the scenario where you're working to an outcome, we do it. In our procurement projects, we work to an outcome. We're taking the risk of our resourcing profile of how we get there. We said we'll deliver that. We will deliver it. We're taking the risk. So you shouldn't be having your cake and eat it, which is they then manage you down on, hold on, you've made too much money on this deal. Yeah, but we took the risk as well.
Exactly.
And that's why. So
No, very good.
How easy is it to do is another matter.
So Kevin, what's your experience of that?
I'm just going to add one thing I've learned that I think could be useful for any agency owners listening, is that kind of job titles vary based on the company. So what I found is when we've maybe in the early days responded, we've just said an SEO consultant, here's the day rate. And then they're comparing that like for like. And if we're more expensive, which quite often we probably are, it looks like, okay, well, let's choose the other one because clearly that's a better deal. And what they don't look at is the value. So what I've started to do on this now is to say, here's a tiered rate card, and the SEO consultant that I was talking about has 10 years experience. The SEO consultant that you're comparing us to on the other agency might be a grad, they might have 2 to 3 years experience, but you're not comparing like for like, because you could be called one job title in one company and it means something completely different in another company. So I've started to now kind of label that, or maybe even give example profiles of, I very rarely say, if it's a long procurement process, this is your absolute team, because stuff changes, but examples of these are the types of people that we would be looking to bring in on your account, so that you can see this is the value behind it, not just this is the cost. I think that's been really important. To be honest, I don't think I have much to add beyond what you've discussed. I think if it feels like there's a value conversation that the client is going to be very receptive to, let's lead with that and let's not worry so much about the rate card. But if you're in a long list of suppliers and you feel like it's an opportunity that you want to go for, I think it's quite hard to break out of that once you're in. You either say yes or no, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some of the the worst examples, there aren't many of these, but a few of RFPs that we've seen when I've been advising suppliers, there's no targets. You know, you've got this kind of RFP with some activity scope in it, no targets. They say they want to hold you accountable for the outcome, but they don't tell you what it is. And then they want the rate card. And me and Kevin are like, we've no idea at all what you're aiming for. And if you won't engage with us, we no bid.
Yeah. And to be honest, you're probably right, because it's an indicator that even post-contract, it's going to be painful.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely right. So, Jeremy, another question for you. I'll turn to Kevin in a second, but another question for you. You're not in the spotlight. So as we kind of tentatively emerge from this recession, and I'm old enough to have been through a lot of recessions, sadly, how are procurement enabling marketing to drive growth? So what do you think is going to perhaps change?
I'd like to believe some of the things I've said are going to change, because when the lessons, I mean, the grocery supply chains, right? We all found out, and even the Suez Canal issue has just highlighted another issue about how interconnected everything is. And I think everyone realised that the small companies, the SMEs, they struggled with cash flow when COVID hit. The big companies struggled with profitability when COVID hit, and everything was misaligned. And I think people have realised that. Not just procurement people, not just marketing people. I think everybody, the common man on the Clapham omnibus and all that, has realised that we all need each other, and it should no longer be about power and how much win you have in your win-win. Because we didn't answer that, but I don't think there are many win-wins. It's degree.
No, I would agree. I would agree.
But I think we're going to move nearer to it. Having just said I don't think there are it, I think we're going to move nearer to it. And I think marketing is a perfect example of how behaviours need to change on both sides, because people need to grow. People have got to grow. There are businesses that have been hibernating, the hospitality sector that are coming out. They need to let people out there know. There's a lot of sympathy out there for people in this situation. There are a lot of, my attendance of the pub has increased because, I'm a hero and I'm trying to help out local business holders. Of course, my wife doesn't agree with this, but that's what I keep telling her. But there's a degree of truth in it. So there's marketing is in a very good place at the moment to get that message out there. Now, if procurement comes in and does the first version of what Kevin described and races to the bottom on price, marketing is not going to hit. It's going to not allow the growth, and we all are going to benefit from UK PLC coming out of this as strong as we can, because we all have tension.
Exactly.
So I think people have just got that understanding of the interconnectivity of business, and procurement needs to get out of the way of marketing, but at the same time, marketing needs to understand that procurement should be trying to help, not hinder, help. So procurement needs to up its game a little bit, and I say there are many functions in marketing procurement that are good at this, and get involved and understand what those outcomes are, and to enable that growth. Not, last year you spent 100 grand on it, this year shall we spend 80 grand on it? That's not going to enable growth. But one example I was thinking of, and maybe it's not marketing, but it's probably easier to understand, is if you've got £1 million and you're going to open 10 stores on the high street, we're not saying don't spend your £1 million. We're saying, what if you could open 11 for the same £1 million rather than 10? That's aiding growth. So it's not about spending less. It's about spending wisely. And some of the stuff on marketing where we've had the most success is not about, you mentioned 3 bids and a buy, Kevin, earlier. That drives the wrong behaviour, if I'm honest about it. That's tactical buying. It's because all you can ever do is compare on price. Yeah. Unless it's really specific and tangible in the RFP, and you said, both of you said, rarely is. It's hard. It's hard in marketing. That's why. You can't do it. So what can you compare on? Rate. Yeah. And as you said, Kevin, you might be, you sell somebody and you sell them at 10 years experience, and guess what? They put in a grad. And that suspicion is what procurement's supposed to do. So it's about, I think, getting closer to it, taking the waste out of the system, not blaming the supplier and saying that the supplier is where the waste comes from. We took 30% out of somebody who was spending like £1 billion on marketing, not because the suppliers were no longer getting their margin, but because there was waste in the process. There was rework, there was waste, there was there was opportunism, don't get me wrong, but that was not where, that was probably 5% of the 30%. The other 25% is, why don't you stop, think, plan, communicate,
Yeah.
and prevent rework? In which
Prevent
case,
rework, exactly.
I mean, everyone's winning. All you're taking out is waste. And I think the change in focus from procurement and the business to allow that to happen and look introspectively rather than blame the suppliers on the assumption the suppliers are being fair, but you can benchmark it quite easily because you can just ask about rates. I think growth will be enabled. And I say procurement does not want its historic tag of being about cost. It wants to show that the value it can bring. And marketing's a good example of where it can do it.
Very good. Kevin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one thing to add to that is it's being educated about marketing. So to Jeremy's point, there is waste in marketing and advertising, and it's the John Wanamaker quote of it's kind of 50% of this is working. I just don't know which 50%. And I think one of the challenges, I've had this discussion with Jeremy before about how I find it quite odd that you'll see some people on their LinkedIn profiles will wear as a badge of honor, I manage £100 million of media spend. And that feels quite backwards to me because I would want to be looking at the outcome. I drive profits of, not I spend. It should be, I'd rather spend 80 million but get the same result. That would be much better.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes, certainly the more traditional media budgets are incentivized by spend. So you have a fee structure where the agency gets a percentage of spend. That to me is really backwards because you're incentivized. If you're an agency and you want to make an extra £1,000 a month, you need to get the client to spend an extra £10,000 a month.
Exactly.
And actually, shouldn't you just say there's something that we could do here? It's a day's worth of work. Here's £1,000. And it drive the efficiencies, not the spend. And that's much better as when you look at that as a win-win. I think there's so much more that you could do to just change that outcome into how do you drive efficiencies, and maybe how do you make that reward model based upon the efficiencies, not incentivized to how do we spend as much money as we possibly can.
Exactly. So just before we get to the kind of the summary part of this, Kevin, just kind of one kind of quick question. When you're negotiating with big brands, and that's obviously the budget holder and procurement, is there anything that you think should be changing in that negotiation part of the sales process to enable that growth?
The one thing I was going to add is I think actually working with you has helped without kind of like pitching you too much, but I do think I was trying to think about how to word that without it sounding like a pitch, but I think really
I don't mind, it's okay.
I think trying to pitch for a deal and then negotiate for a deal is really hard because you're too invested. You've just gone through, it could be like 3 rounds of pitching. You have that massive feeling of we've won, let's go out as a team, let's celebrate with, I know, pizza, beer, whatever you want to do. And then they say, oh, by the way, we need you to drop your price. And by that point, you're kind of like, oh, go on then, because we want to win this. Whereas actually, if you've got someone that is disconnected,
I think Jeremy's smiling.
but you bring in Mike.
It's called the Columbo approach in negotiation.
The Columbo. There's just one more thing.
Mike does that all the time. Yeah,
it's awful. You shouldn't do it because it erodes relationships, and you've got to work with people.
It does
exactly.
But if you can bring in Mike, and Mike's not invested in the deal, and he's just looking at what's your margin and what did you pitch for, and I can like disassociate myself to a certain extent and say, we've done our job. We've convinced the marketing team. They want to bring in someone else to negotiate. We're going to bring in someone else to negotiate. Yeah. And then it feels like more of a level playing field. So I think that's probably my advice, is to try and split the two. And on their side, they're absolutely trained professionals in negotiation. So if we have no training or any knowledge about negotiation, we're going to lose. So I think it's maybe being prepared to bring someone else in and being prepared to say that agencies can quite often get trapped in this race of, we want to get more revenue, we want to increase our headcount, therefore the profit will come. And actually, it doesn't always work like that. If you're getting beaten up on price too heavily,
Yeah.
bringing someone else in to say, actually, if you don't bring your margins in here, you've just won £1 million contract that you're not making any money on. That makes no sense. It's a waste of time and effort.
So in fact, the next article that comes out in the drum that I've written is called The Winner's Curse. And it's all about, as economies recover, what typically happens is it's a buyer's market, and they drive prices really hard, and they drive them too hard. And it's the essence of this conversation. There's a danger that the buyer's very powerful, agencies need the work, and they end up buying work that they can't make money on. And that's very dangerous for everyone. To your point, Jeremy, it's a very point well made, is we're all interconnected. And if you drive suppliers too far, then they make no money, they can't reinvest, they fail, and then the system fails.
Yeah, I would just to add to it. I mean, I agree. There's a qualification piece, I would say, for people to look at, because if some of the scenarios you've said here, Kevin, around unclear ask, unclear requirement, unclear process, and a lack of communication, then run. Yeah. I mean, or go into it in the Boston, I think it's the BCG matrix. See it as it's a premium. Just price it high and go. If we win it, great, fantastic, we'll do it. Because it's a bad process, and it's all the signs that it's going to be a bad relationship as well. Because if procurement get dragged in every quarter and it's like, crawl all over it, it's disconnected internally. Nothing to do with the supplier. This is the buyer's problem. It's disconnected. But if you've got someone who's communicating, and you've got procurement involved in those early communications, and half the procurement world is about to turn against me when I say this, but the single source relationship in a growth agenda, in terms of the conversation you're having with that marketeer, if that marketeer is linked in with procurement at the time, will be much more valuable than doing a tactical 3 bids and a buy or a pitch process.
Yeah.
Because it just is the pitch process. To your point, you've added in. Here's Sue. Sue's got 10 years. Here's Barry. Barry's got 2 years. Right? How do I compare that? Because
exactly,
as much as you've been given a structure to bid against, you'll all look at it and go, "Ooh, I wouldn't do it like that."
Yeah.
And it's impossible for procurement to then evaluate because they haven't been specific. So, yeah, relationships are key. Relationships are important. Relationships should be leveraged, but there should be transparency and some control. Take out the waste, and everybody's a winner.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, you've just answered the question, which was, what's your lessons learned? So I think you've just summarized that really nicely. So Kevin, in terms of just kind of closing this down, what are your kind of lessons learned that someone on the audience could pick up?
I think it's what Jeremy just said. It's making marketing and procurement work closely together. I think on our side, it's that point of only do deals when they make sense, because don't start with a deal that doesn't make sense, hoping that one day it will make sense. You have to go into that. But I've got one example of how that did come together very well. So there's a good friend of mine who was SEO director for a big publishing group, ran a procurement process, or actually worked together with the head of procurement and run a 2-day workshop, which was in New York, and brought together the heads of SEOs. And there were kind of like 15 heads of SEOs across the group, because they're a large group, there's different companies, and there was very little knowledge sharing across the group. So by bringing them together, he said, let's do an education piece. So let's all share some knowledge about what it is we've learned, help each other out, and then let's bring in some agencies. So I was one of the speakers that we were working with, one of the brands in London, and I shared some examples of here's the work that we've been doing. And at the end of this process, what they did is they shared, these are the agencies and these are the software tools. And they narrowed down between the 15 of them, who are the top 5 agencies, who are the top 5 software tools. And what we want to do is we want to drive efficiencies across those 5 and give you choice of using those 5, because they're the best that you're using. And now we can give those agencies more work, so they're more open to a discount. And we can use those the software tools more heavily, so they're more open to the discount. And we cut all of the spend by using all of the other suppliers that are not so strong. And it just seemed like a very good use of 2 days worth of budget, it's good fun. I think that bringing people together for dinner, drinks and stuff like that, as well as bringing it, not just doing that on its own, but bringing it as an educational piece. You could see marketing and procurement were completely aligned and on the same page, and it's better for both sides. So I think that just as a story and an example to show how that has worked well. It can work well together, but you need to put the effort into that relationship.
Very good. Brilliant. A lot more came out of this than I thought, which was fantastic. So Jeremy, thanks ever so much for coming on, and thanks for your time.
Congratulations on your award, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
And happy birthday, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. All right. And yeah, thanks, and look forward to seeing you in the future.